For anybody who doesn't know, Ron DeSantis tried to fuck over Disney. Disney was not so happy about that. And DeSantis basically was political. He was throwing his political weight and rulings around to try to bully Disney. But Disney's kind of a giant megacorporation who could probably take on the government if they wanted to. Like, some companies have that kind of capability. Disney is one of them. As far as I'm concerned, Disney needs to be divided up into it's a too big of a conglomerate and needs to be divvied up. But I'm not here to criticize Disney today. I'm here to talk about Florida Man Governor. So I also have, and I will pass this along to you, if you want to look at all of the documentation in this court case, please feel free. I'm going to look at the main document, the main complaint. So we have, in the United States District Court for the Northern District of Florida, Walt Disney Parks and Resorts US Inc. So it's not even actually like all of Disney, it is specifically the Parks and Resorts section of Disney. Versus Florida Man and in his official capacity as the governor of Florida, Meredith Evie in her official capacity as acting secretary, and the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity, Martin Garcia in his official capacity as board and chair of Florida Central Florida Tourism Oversight District, Michael Sasso, and his official capacity as board member of the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District, Brian August Jr. I don't know how to pronounce names. In his official capacity as a board member of the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District, Ron Perry. In his official capacity as a board member of the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District, Bridget Zingler. In her official capacity as a board member of the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District, and John Classe in his official capacity as administrator of the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District. So if you don't know about this, I definitely recommend looking into it. I'm sure you can find a TLDR somewhere, or something that goes into more depth if that's what you're interested in. Shorthand is that Governor Florida Man tried to take this board of directors that existed as part of Disney and their management of the area around Disneyland, including streets and like maintenance and stuff like that, and the huge tax breaks that Disney got for being in Florida. Ron DeSantis tried to change some of that and take over that board. When he tried, Disney fired back by changing what the board was capable of and basically stripping it of all of its power, and DeSantis has tried to fire back against Disney using that. So basically the House of Mouse caught him with his pants down, and he got mad about it, has tried to retaliate via government changes, government overhauls, and political power. And now Disney is like, nah, no. You get fucked. So let's look at the complaint. So this is Disney versus DeSantis and Friends. Florida Man and Friends. Also, that should be a TV show. Government overreach, is going to be the main thing here. Which is funny, because the conservatives love to complain about government overreach, and meanwhile, what political affiliation is DeSantis? Conservative? He's a Republican? Yeah, go figure. Complaint for declaration and injunctive relief. So the case number, for anybody who cares to look it up, is 423 CV00163 M-MW-MAF. Introduction, blah, 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 blah. We're skipping this. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. Plaintiff Walt Disney Parks and Resort US Inc., Disney, or the company, the owner and operator of the Walt Disney Resort, Walt Disney World in Central Florida, alleges in support of its complaint for declaratory and injunctive relief as follows. Man, it's been a while since I read one of these. Introduction. For more than half of a century, Disney has made an immeasurable impact on Florida and its economy, establishing Central Florida as a top global tourist destination for attracting tens of millions of visitors to the state each year. People and families from every corner of the globe have traveled to Walt Disney World because of the unrivaled guest experience it provides and the deep emotional connection that generations of fans have with Disney's timeless stories and characters. I'm not here to criticize Disney. I'm not here to criticize Disney. I'm not here to criticize Disney. We will talk about this another time. A targeted campaign of government retaliation orchestrated at every step by Governor DeSantis as punishment for Disney's protected speech now threatens Disney's business operations, jeopardizes its economic future in the region, and violates its constitutional rights. Remember, in America, corporations are people. Today's actions is the latest strike. At the governor's bidding, the state's oversight board has purported to void publicly noticed and duly agreed development contracts, which had laid the foundation for billions of Disney's investment dollars and thousands of jobs. This is also a very good point. Disney employs a dickload of people that live and work in Florida. Like a metric dick fun. Sorry for the tag, but BSW says hi and you have to know this. Hello! Tell her I say hi and she is wonderful. Exploratory Minds, good to see you. Also, you should, Razor, do you mind linking her channel? Link her channel. 75,000 at the moment, and this would add another 13,000. Yeah. So, okay, blah, blah, blah. This government's action was patently retaliatory, patently anti-business, and patently unconstitutional. This is strong language. It should be strong, but, like, it's strong. But this is a legal document. The governor and his allies have made clear they do not care and will not stop. The governor recently declared that his team would not only void the development agreement, just as they did today, but also planned, quote, to look at things like taxes on the hotels, tolls on the roads, developing some of the property that the district owns with more amusement parks, and even putting a state prison next to Disney World. Who knows? Just think the possibilities are endless, he said. I don't think putting an amusement, like a government-funded amusement park right beside Disney World would be a good idea, like financially, but, you know, what do I know? Go follow Bloodstained Wings. That's their Twitch channel. They are fantastic and lovely. I definitely recommend going and checking them out. And also, tell them I sent you. Say hi for me. Say hi from the Goblin Squad. Disney regrets that it has come to this, but having exhausted efforts to seek resolution, the company is left with no other choice but to file this lawsuit to protect its cast members, guests, and local development partners from a relentless campaign to weaponize government power against Disney in retaliation for expressing a political viewpoint unpopular with certain state officials. Disney is enormously proud of the foundational role it has played in creating Central Florida's tourism industry. The Reedy Creek Improvement District, RCID, or the district, Disney's local governing jurisdiction, was integral to its success in the beginning in 1967. Fast forward, getting special financial treatment from the government to grow your business is definitely going to help you grow your business, that's for sure. We're not here to criticize Disney. We're not here to criticize Disney. We're not here to criticize Disney. Fast forward 5 decades, and Disney today is an unparalleled engine for economic growth in the state. Among other distinctions, Disney is one of Central Florida's largest taxpayers, with more than $1.1 billion paid in state and local taxes last year. I bet you it should be higher. We're not here to criticize Disney. Disney is also... thank you so much for the 100 bits, Exploratory Minds. Local tax, Disney is also one of the largest employers in the state with more than 75,000 cast members. The state of Florida has flourished in the years since Walt Disney himself surveyed many acres of swampland in 1963 and dreamed of the possibility of Walt Disney World, destroying the ecosystem in the process. I'm not here to criticize Disney. Florida's listen, I have problems with some of Disney and some of Disney's practices, okay? I don't... The state of Florida has flourished in the years since Walt Disney himself... Blah, 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 blah. Florida's elected officials have long understood how consequential Disney is to the state's economy and future, just as Disney has sought to be constructive, responsible, and charitable Florida resident. Governor DeSantis and his allies paid no mind to the governing structure that facilitated Creaky Reed's successful development until 1 year ago when the governor decided to target Disney. There is no room for disagreement about what happened here. Disney expressed its opinion on state legislation and then was punished by the state for doing so. And that should not be the case. Governor DeSantis announced that Disney's statement had, quote, crossed the line, a line evidently separating permissible speech from intolerable speech, and launched a barrage of threats against the company in immediate response. Since then, the governor, the legislature, and the governor's handpicked local government regulators have moved beyond threats to official action, employing the machinery of the state in a coordinated campaign to damage Disney's ability to do business in Florida. So I wonder and I'm curious to know what you guys think. Do you think that this would affect, and the amount of sway, like financial sway Disney has, is going to affect the presidential election and affect whether or not the Republican Party, like views DeSantis as a viable candidate? Because if Disney gets pissed off enough and doesn't want this guy to be president, they have a lot of money to throw around. State leaders have not been subtle about their reasons for government intervention. They have proudly declared that Disney deserves this fate because of what Disney said. This is as clear as a case of retaliation as this court is ever likely to see. At the governor's behest, the legislature first voted to dissolve the long-standing RCID, then ultimately voted to give near complete control of RCID to the governor himself. As the Florida representative who introduced the Reedy Creek dissolution bill declared to the Florida House State Affairs Committee, quote, "You kick the hornet's nest, things come up, and I will say this, you got me on one thing, this bill does target one company, it targets the Walt Disney Company," end quote. Disney has never wanted a fight with the Florida government. I actually believe that. The company sought to de-escalate the matter for nearly a year, trying several times to spark a productive dialogue with the DeSantis administration, to no avail. Amid great uncertainty about the lengths to which the state would go to keep punishing Disney for its views, RCID and the company gave public notice in January 2023 that they would enter into contracts to secure future development for the district and Walt Disney World, contracts that implemented a comprehensive plan for the district and that the DeSantis administration itself had found compliant with Florida law months earlier. Though the development plan and implementing contracts, through the development plan and implementing contracts, Disney set huge goals for itself and laid foundations for spectacular economic growth in Central Florida. Disney plans to invest over $17 billion in Walt Disney World over the next decade. The company estimates that all those investments will create 13,000 new Disney jobs in that same 10-year time period. If anything is secure, it's Disney. Big goals aside, these contracts are land use agreements between a developer and its local regulator. They are similar in character to contracts between other developers and special districts to fix long-term development rights and obligations, thereby facilitating the certainty needed to ensure investment and effective commercial progress. Makes sense. Contrary to misunderstandings and mischaracterizations by some government leaders, they do not determine the newly constituted Central Florida Tourism Oversight District, the CFTOD, SFTOD, or the district. Board's ability to govern and exercise authority, including by imposing taxes, exercising the power of eminent domain, approving or disapproving building permit applications, including for the projects carried out pursuant to the development agreement, building roads, providing emergency services, or issuing bonds. Moreover, nothing about these contracts was a surprise. They were discussed and approved after open, noticed public forums in compliance with Florida law, and in the very same legislation that replaced the elected boards governing Disney with the board members picked by the governor. The state legislature reaffirmed the enforceability of all prior contracts, including those here. Disney takes seriously its responsibility to shareholders, employees, and the many residents and local businesses in Central Florida whose livelihood depend on Walt Disney World. And Disney now is forced to defend itself against state weaponizing its power to inflict political punishment. It is a clear violation of Disney's federal constitutional rights under the Contract Clause, the Talking Clause, the Due Process Clause, and the First Amendment. We're actually talking about something that actually includes the First Amendment for once, not something that's just bringing up the First Amendment for the sake of bringing up the First Amendment. Amazing. That never happens. For the state to inflict a concerted campaign of retaliation because the company expressed an opinion with which the government disagreed, and it is a clear violation of those rights for the CFTOD board to declare its own legally binding contracts to void and unenforceable. Disney thus seeks relief from this court in order to carry out its long-held business plans. Disney finds itself in a regrettable position because it expressed a viewpoint the governor and his allies did not like. Disney wishes that things could have been resolved in a different way, but Disney also knows that it is fortunate to have the resources to take a stand against the state's retaliation, a stand smaller businesses and individuals might not be able to take when the state comes after them for expressing their own views. No, good guy Disney, what a hero. In America, the government cannot punish you for speaking your mind. Parties. Walt Disney Park Resort and Resorts US Inc. is a Florida corporation with its principal place of business in Orange County, Florida. Disney owns and operates Walt Disney World in Central Florida. Guests from around the world visit to enjoy a Disney vacation where their family members can all blah, 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 blah. Defendant Ronald D. DeSantis is the governor of Florida. Governor DeSantis called on the legislature to pass a bill pass bills to punish Disney for its speech. One bill dissolved the Reedy Creek Improvement District, RCID. The other installing a governor-selected oversight board. He signed into law Senate Bill C-4, 2022, and House Bill 9B, 2023. And appointed the members of the newly constituted Central Florida Tourism Oversight District, CFTOD, board, Disney's local regulator. And you can find this here, which is Florida Constituent, I don't know what this is supposed to stand for, Article 4, Paragraph 1, Sentence Bill 4-C, Florida Laws, Chapter 2022-266, amending Florida's statute, Paragraph 189.0311, Senate Bill 4-C, House Bill 9B, B, Florida Laws Chapter 2023-5, House Bill 9B, and Florida Law Chapter 2023-5, CFTOD Charter, Paragraph 4, Bracket 1. Sorry, I only read those references out because in this case it's quite important. If you want to go find it yourself, that's how you find it. Whew. Yes, exploratory minds. Very much so. Defendant Meredith is the acting secretary of the Florida Department of Economics. As acting secretary, serves as the head of the Florida Department. Blah 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 blah. This is just who everybody is. We read out who they were already, and it's just got like a little how they're sued in this official capacity. So we can skip all this. Jurisdiction is just arguing that it should take place in Florida. Yeah, of course it should. Disney is in Florida. The part that's going after them is in Florida. He's the governor of Florida. I don't think that there's going to be any kind of argument about jurisdiction here. That would probably be absolutely absurd if there was. Factual background. Walt Disney, acres of land, yada yada yada. We already kind of covered most of this in the intro, so good job on the Disney lawyers. I don't know if there's anything in this world that would terrify me more if somebody was threatening me legally than Disney lawyers, to be honest. Like, that's just fucking terrifying. Over a multi-year process, Disney and the district complete comprehensive plan of 2023. Yeah, we talked about this already. Again, this is linked. I can't give you that link. I gave you the link already if you wanted to go and look at this yourself, but I will post it again. If you want to read through everything, I don't think we really need to go through everything here, and I don't really have time to go through everything here today. We can always come back to this if you guys want. We can read through the whole thing, but it seems pretty cut and dry. Blah, blah, blah. Sorry, I'm just going down to the next chapter here. Governor DeSantis and the legislature reconstitute and seize control of the district. In early of October 2022, reports emerged that Governor DeSantis had finally had developed a plan to seize control of Disney's governing body, which we talked about. Amid increasing retaliatory state action, Disney and RCID execute a 2-year-long plan use contracts after publicized in open hearings. Government contracts. District and Governor DeSantis replaces elected board. Yep, this is all kind of just explaining the situation. So this is what they're suing for. They replaced our board. They basically, here's how they've overstepped. They're overreaching and stepping on our rights. First cause of action, contracts clause violation. Disney realleges. Here we go. And in court, everything I just skipped past was basically Disney establishing how and why they're doing what they set out to do in the stuff I had previously read. Disney realleges and incorporates by referencing all preceding paragraphs. CFTOD's abrogation. What is that? I've never seen this word before. What is abrogation?
Abrogation.
I pronounced it correctly. The repeat or abolition of a law, right, or agreement. Abrogation is a simile to the word abolition. Very cool. Abrogation of the contracts violates Disney's rights under the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1, known as the Contracts Clause. The Contracts Clause provided that, quote, no state shall, ellipses, pass any, ellipses, law impairing the obligations of contracts. The Contract Clause prohibits local government entities from abrogating, I added an extra O and an extra G. Abrogating their own contracts with private entities. And then there's a reference. Reference. A law that impairs a government's entity's known contracts with a private actor is especially suspect and hence subjected to heightened judicial scrutiny. The rights protected by the Contracts Clause are familiar to Florida law. Indeed, the Florida Supreme Court has pronounced the right to contract to be, quote, one of the most sacrosanct rights guaranteed by our fundamental law. Emphasis added. The legislative declaration violates that most sacrosanct rights and thus deprives Disney of its rights under the Contract Clause. By declaring the contracts void, the legislative declaration purports to rescind Disney's rights and protections under the contracts and relieve CFTOD of any obligation to comply with its obligations under the contracts to pay damages for any breaches. The substantial, indeed total impairment of Disney's contract rights was not necessary to serve an important government interest as required to survive the Contract Clause scrutiny. As alleged in this complaint, the contracts were abrogated as part of an explicit campaign of official government retaliation against Disney for expressing a viewpoint in the governor and legislature disagreed with. That objective is the opposite of important. It is categorically impermissible. Any other asserted reasons for abrogating the contracts are pretextual. RCID was fully empowered to enter into these contracts. Special districts commonly enter into contracts with developers, including special districts with governing structures defined by land ownership. Yeah, this is normal. And all law establishing CFTOD expressly provides that all pretexting RCID contracts remain fully enforceable as CFD-TOD Charter, paragraph 1. Just as in any other long-term development contract in other special districts, the contracts here involve land use rights and obligations not sovereign or police power that special districts are legally barred from delegating. The contracts establish Disney's rights concerning use of its own property, and as expressly authorized by RCID's charter, restricts CFTOD from using its own property for non-public purposes that interfere with Disney's development of its property. Reed Creek Establishing Act, paragraph 9, authorizing RCID to subject its land to encumbrance. In addition, the contracts restrict Disney's use of its own property to specified development purposes and obligate Disney to convey its property at fair use market value when needed for public purposes. Yeah, that makes sense. CFTOD has identified, basically it's that companies and governments need to work together, and if one of them needs to make a change, they're supposed to work together to do so in a fair and good faith way. And there are rules and regulations around what the government's allowed to do and what the companies are allowed to do and who has to accept whose authority under which circumstances. CFTOD has identified no reason or need to treat the contracts differently from long-term development agreements entered into by developers in other special districts. Even if CFTOD could articulate an important interest uniquely implicated by the contracts that is not implicated by other special district development contracts, CFTOD cannot show that complete abrogation of the contract is necessary to serve any such interest. Under the Contract Clause, the government, quote, is not free to impose a drastic impairment when an evident and more moderate course would serve its purpose equally well. An impairment of a contract thus is prohibited if, quote, a less drastic modification would have permitted. The government's would have permitted, end quote, the government to advance its purpose while allowing the contract to remain in place. Had CFTOD had not identified any important government interest justifying its abrogation at all, much less an important interest that cannot be satisfied by modifying some provision or provisions of the contracts. CFTOD's decision to abrogate the contracts completely rather than pursue modification or of whatever provisions CFTOD claim to be unlawful underscores its motivation to punish Disney for its political speech rather than to operate in a good faith as a good faith counterparty. That's what I said. In the continued development of the district, Disney is entitled to a declaration of abrogation of the contracts violates Disney's rights under the contract clause and that the contract remains in effect and enforceable. Disney is further entitled to an order enjoining defendants from enforcing the legislative declaration. Second clause of action taking clause violation. Whew. Man, it's been so long since I read one of these, man. Disney's lawyers are fucking terrifying. I can only imagine them being nothing but an army. Like I would bet you money that Disney's lawyers are better than government lawyers and better than the lawyers the government uses. I can't imagine like any group of lawyers being better at their job than but maybe Nintendo. Maybe Nintendo might be able to compete with Disney for like how good their lawyers are, like how much money they spend on all this shit. Like Jesus Christ. Nintendo is kind of a bit of a bitch about this, though. Sorry, I just need to put something in my face hole. I'm getting hungry. I gotta go for food soon, but we're gonna get through this. I believe in us. Alright. Disney realleges and incorporates by reference all preceding paragraphs. The legislative declaration takes Disney's property without providing just compensation in violation of the talking clause of the Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. The taking clause provides, quote, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. U.S. Constitution Amendment 5. Quote, contract rights are a form of property and, as such, may be taken for public purpose provided that just compensation is paid, end quote, and then references. Not all contract rights necessarily qualify as property under the taking clause, and thus, quote, the fact that legislation disregards or destroys existing contractual rights does not always transform the regulation into an illegal taking, end quote, reference. The contract secured valuable substantive rights in specific property, i.e. the parcels explicitly identified in the contracts. The development agreement, for example, grants Disney long-term rights in the use and development of its land, consistent with the comprehensive plan found compliant with Florida law by DeSantis administration. So, just to be clear, basically Disney is saying they already agreed to these contracts and now they're rescinding them as a form of punishment because they didn't like something we said on Twitter. The restrictive covenants likewise protects Disney's rights to develop its land by limiting CFTOD's ability to use its adjacent lands in ways that damage or destroy Disney's development rights. Quote, when the government uses its own property in such a way that it destroys private property, it has taken that property. So, talking about like developing things or like adding tolls and stuff like that. At least in reference of this lawsuit. The legislative declaration expressly deprives Disney of those valuable rights in private property without making any payment to Disney in exchange for the deprivation. Right. The legislative declaration thus takes... So basically it's saying that there are rules and regulations in place that if the government wanted to take property from Disney, Disney would be... and they could prove just reasoning as to why they were taking it, Disney would have to say, okay, here's the amount. And then the government would be, okay, here's the amount. And they would trade off. And again, ideally they should be operating in good faith, but if that went to a lawsuit, then it would just be, you'd have to prove the government would have to prove that they were justly taking it from Disney, and then they would have to say, here's the market, the appropriate market value of that land, and here's your money. And then Disney could then argue that, no, you don't have just reasoning to take it, and the amount that you're offering isn't just, and here's why, yada, yada, yada. And that would be the route you would take. in that kind of situation. The legislative declaration thus takes Disney's property without just compensation. Disney is entitled to a declaration that the taking of Disney property rights without payment of just compensation violates the taking clause, and that the property rights set forth in the contracts remain in effect and enforceable. Disney is further entitled to an order enjoining defendants from enforcing the legislative declaration. Third cause of action, due process clause violation. Nom, 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 nom. This was the best thing I bought when I went to the grocery store. They were on like 2 for $6 animal crackers. I was like, hell yeah. I should have bought 4. Okay. Disney realleges and incorporates by referencing all preceding paragraphs. The legislative declaration abrogates the contracts without any rational basis, and for irrational is a good way to put what Florida Man kind of is about. Without any rational basis and for only impermissible reasons in violation of the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. The Due Process Clause provides, quote, no person shall be, ellipses, deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of the law. And again, I will reiterate, corporations are considered person in this context. The Due Process Clause forbids any state or local entity from adopting any arbitrary and irrational legislative act affecting a person's state-created rights, including property interests. In other words, quote, states must demonstrate that they are violating private interests only as necessary to promote state interests, end quote. References are all there. FCTOD cannot make that showing here as alleged in this complaint. The legislative declaration purporting to abrogate the contracts was not enacted for any legitimate state interest. It was instead enacted to further an official state campaign of retaliation against Disney for expressing a viewpoint that Governor DeSantis and his legislative allies disagree with. Further, CFTOD does not and cannot demonstrate that complete abrogation of the contracts is reasonably necessary to advance any state interest that could be legitimate. CFTOD cannot show that the contracts are dissimilar in character to the contracts between other developers and special districts to fix long-term development rights and obligations, nor can CFTOD show that the contracts contradict any aspects of comprehensive plan found complete by the state. CFTOD thus cannot identify a non-arbitrary rational basis for singling out and voiding the contracts. It really it is 100% in like Disney's favor that they are the ones who wrote these contracts and had them approved already and have all of the prior knowledge of all of these contracts. There's no information that Disney doesn't have, which gives Disney a huge advantage, which is not the case for Governor Florida Man and his cronies. Like, they are likely at a disadvantage when it comes to who has what information about whom and about the case, right? Disney is entitled to a declaration that the arbitrary and irrational voiding of the contracts violates due process clause and the contracts remain in effect and enforceable. Disney is further entitled to an order enjoining defendants from enforcing the legislative declaration. Fourth cause of action, First Amendment violation. Disney's public statements on House Bill 1557 are fully protected by the First Amendment, which applies with particular force to political speech. See Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission 558 U.S. 310-342, 2010. Speech such as Disney's on public issues and petitions to the government, quote, occupy the core of the protection afforded by the First Amendment, end quote, reference. First Amendment protects speech, quote, intended to influence public opinion and, in turn, any proposed legislation, end quote. CFTOD's retaliatory interference with the contracts via the legislative declaration and its predicates has chilled and continues to chill Disney's protected speech. Reference discussing action that would that quote would likely deter a person of ordinary firmness from the exercise of the First Amendment right, end quote. This unconstitutional chilling effect is particularly offensive here due to the clear retaliatory and punitive intent that has motivated CFTOD's actions at the governor's directive. Reference, quote, our First Amendment demands that a law enforcement officer may not use his power post to chill or punish speech he does not like, end quote. Disney has a significant interest in its own contracts, yeah, duh, which have been directly targeted by the legislative declaration. Disney faces concrete, imminent, and ongoing injury as a result of the contractual impairment. If it's a development plan, it would absolutely have an effect on that. CFTOD's actions were motivated by retaliatory intent. On April 17th, Governor DeSantis warned that the CFTOD board would be meeting in a few days later to, quote, make sure Disney is held accountable. Later that day, Governor DeSantis announced, quote, I look forward to the additional actions that the state control board will implement in the upcoming days, end quote. Governor DeSantis has let no doubt be harbored as to the impetus for his punishment. He wrote in an article to promote his book. Is he allowed to make a book while he's a sitting person? Damn it. I thought that was like not that. Is that just for the president? Well, that seems weird. I feel like you shouldn't be. Whatever. Never mind. Different conversation. He wrote in an article to promote his book, quote, when corporations try to use their economic power to advance a woke agenda, they become political and not merely economic actors, ellipses. Leaders must stand up and fight back when big corporations make the mistake, as Disney did, of using their economic might to advance a political agenda. I'm pretty sure there's supposed to be, I think that's a typo, I think there's supposed to be a space there. Okay, so I'm just going to pause for just a second and talk about this. Then get them the fuck, then lobbying should be illegal. Like, get them the fuck out of the government, get them out of your pocket, my guy. If you're gonna go that route and you're gonna make that argument, you're gonna need to make some serious legislative changes. There is no rational basis to invalidate the contracts, and the purported justifications for doing so are pretextual. I agree with this, specifically because if what DeSantis was doing was trying to remove big corporations from politics, they wouldn't be targeting these contracts. They'd be targeting, like, lobbying. So, because the legislative declaration retaliates against woke agenda, because the legislative declaration retaliates against Disney for its hiring gay people, Disney held a gay pride parade. Like, I know, I'm not eating that cookie right now, hold on, sorry. The more my brain processes this, the more ridiculous it sounds. Because the legislative declaration retaliates against Disney for its protected speech, Disney is entitled to a declaration judgment that the legislative declaration is unconstitutional and an order enjoining defendants from enforcing it. Fifth cause of violation, First Amendment violation. Disney realleges and incorporates by reference all preceding paragraphs. As discussed, Disney's public statement on HB 155, that's House Bill, 1557 are fully protected by the First Amendment, which applies with particular force to political speech. Reference again that we already said. The retaliatory constitution of Disney's governing body structure through the enactment of Senate Bill 4C and House Bill 9B, have chilled and continue to chill Disney's protected speech. They're using the word chill here specifically because it's what's referenced in the references. It's terminology that's already used in the law. The retaliatory this unconstitutional chilling effect is particularly offensive due to the clear retaliatory and punitive intent and motivation by the government and the legislature's actions. Disney has a significant interest in its governing body's composition and structure, which has been directly targeted by the enactment of legislation providing for its complete revision. Disney faces concrete, imminent, and ongoing injury as a result of CFTOD's new powers and composition. So yeah, Disney had a governing body that was set up to look out for Disney's interest and work with the sitting government, since Disney was part of their tax-exempt tax-exempt status, or exemptions that they got for taxes, meant that they were also responsible for taking care of things like the roads and making sure that emergency services can get to where they need to go, and things like that. So things that would normally be taken care of by the government were being taken care of by Disney. Governor DeSantis going through and trying to take control of what Disney was responsible for by restructuring that governing body and replacing the people that were on that board with his own people. Disney did the smart thing by passing a vote that basically neutered the control that governing body had over Disney itself before that legislation went through. But although funny, would have been disastrous had Disney not done that for themselves. On top of it, this absolutely, imminently, and 100% affects Disney directly. So, moving on. Disney faces blah, 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 blah. Senate Bill 4C and House Bill 9B were motivated by retaliatory intent. Governor DeSantis would not have promoted or signed, and the legislature would not have enacted either bill, but for their desire to punish Disney for its speech on an important public issue. Quote, sources of information about the government's motivation for suspending a prosecutor, including a tweet from the governor's press secretary and comments during the governor's announcement of the suspension. End quote reference. Governor DeSantis called on the legislature to extend its special session for the express purpose of enacting Senate Bill 4C the very day after Disney made their statement about House Bill 1557. He repeatedly and publicly stated that he was, quote, fighting back, end quote, for Disney's criticism of the House Bill 1557, including at the bill signing ceremony. Key legislators publicly acknowledged that Senate Bill 4C targeted Disney. The law's passage was highly irregular. The bill was added to a special session convened for other purposes, even though there was no emergency that would justify such rushed treatment. RCID had existed for decades, and Senate Bill 4C did not propose dissolution until June 2023. The bill passed only 3 days after identical bills were simultaneously introduced in the House and Senate. There was no debate in the House, stakeholders did not have time to conduct their own analysis, and no concrete plan for effective dissolution of RCID or address the ramifications of doing so was proposed in the months following the legislation's hasty enactment. Reference number, and then quote, departures from the normal procedural sequence also might afford evidence that improper processes are playing a role. Substantive departures may